So the model minority myth was a construct created by a Caucasian person in the 60s and effectively used to weaponize the API community against the Black community who were fighting for collective civil rights. They pointed to this other group, APIs, and said, look at these non-white folks. They're quiet, diligent, gainfully employed, high income. Why don't all of you others, as it were, become them? It gives the misperception that APIs are all gainfully employed, educated, and so forth, when in reality, we actually have the widest income disparity of any race. And so within the own community, you start to fracture us. The second issue is when two minorities fight each other, we all know what happens. Only one wins, and that is, of course, the old majority.
We're happy that you were able to join with us.
I'm so honored.
How do you describe yourself?
The pragmatic answer is I'm an impact entrepreneur. So I'm a serial entrepreneur and investor, but everything I do focuses on sort of human existence as opposed to, I don't know, Netflix for clowns. The sort of BS answer is I think of myself as a world builder. So my approach to everything is ecosystem or system based. And this is inspired from my days at YouTube, where I erected sort of the global creator ecosystem, co-created the notion of influencer marketing, for better or worse, yada, 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 all the way to our work with Goldhouse now, where we are trying to fundamentally reshape the experience for 4.5 billion people.
And what 4.5 billion people is that?
Those would be the Asians and Pacific Islanders, which many people don't know. Our race is actually the world's majority. And so, and yet we are not in a position to serve, lead, influence, and so forth in a way that I think is expeditious.
Can you just give the mission of Goldhouse for the folks watching?
We're here to mobilize APIs, who again are the largest majority in the world, for greater socioeconomic equity. Now, I know that's like a loaded whatever, but socio meaning reshaping public opinion about us through media, and then economic specifically through small business and more C-suite influence. We think that to that end, if we can change how we're seen and valued, we can change our standing and our ability to positively influence society.
Now, I understand that Shanghai influences. I'm trying to think more about the Tennessee. How does the Tennessee influences come out at certain points?
Yes, my cheesy articulation or succinct articulation of my upbringing is my heart and values come from Tennessee. So I love people. I think there's good in everyone, so forth. Mm-hmm. My eyes come from Shanghai. I grew up very, very quickly as a 10-year-old when sort of the second renaissance of expats came in. And then I sort of euphemistically say my taste comes from Orange County, California, but that's because it's the best compliment I can give to that area because everyone's a snob and shallow. And so
Wait, your taste, sensory taste, or your aesthetic?
My aesthetic,
Interesting.
My hedonistic taste comes from there, yeah. I can eat at Hometown Buffet or we can eat at Jean Georges. It's either or.
Now, going back to Shanghai at such a young age and going into school there and, a woman walking in, a mom from Palestine, where she's experienced death. What does it mean to be in that room with so many different people from all over the world? They're not from Tennessee anymore, but what does that do to your experiences?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for doing your homework. I'm very flattered. So as you're alluding to, the first day of Shanghai American School, there's a young lady who basically came in bawling into class when we're all 10, and it was because her uncle's store had gotten bombed in the Gaza Strip. And I hate to say it, the kids these days take globality and things like this for granted these days, I think partly because of 9/11. I think what it does is, one, it not only opens your eyes up to the wide disparity that exists around the world. We complain about not being able to watch blank show or get blank app or blank phone when there are quite literally people who can't just not eat. They are literally getting bombed. I think the second thing that it forces you to reconcile at the most extreme level, because it's death, is why you should give a damn about everyone else. And by virtue of that, how we are similar as opposed to just different. We're all just trying to live. We're all just trying to find the career we want. We're just trying to, be with the people that we love. And then I think the third thing is that it sort of impressed upon me very early that I had to reimagine how I saw the world, not just in terms of disparity, but how I was personally able to navigate it. To extrapolate this, Professor Adam Grant at the Wharton School actually empirically corroborated this, but the single greatest determinant of a creative and versatile adult is whether you are a third culture kid. So being in Shanghai or from Tennessee, cultural antipodals is category A, third culture kiddom. Barack Obama, Hawaii, Indonesia, category A, third culture kiddom. And so I think it created that great appreciation of, it sucks to, be in a place where no one looks like how I was raised and so forth, but this is now going to force me to grow up and navigate the world to make it even smaller, faster.
Now, you mentioned Wharton there. You didn't want to go to Wharton.
No.
And you're, somebody made you go to Wharton, and at first you thought that would be a mistake because you wanted to be a writer and do these other creative things. But what was the experience at Wharton what did it do for you?
I am so flattered that you did so much homework on me. This is very jarring.
You should be. I think this is more homework than I've ever seen, and we're getting to our 100th episode.
I was going to say, Jesse, I don't know why I'm not famous yet, but thank you. I'll send you an expensive bottle of your favorite Blake. No, I mean, I think if you want my honest answer, I find that when you make these big decisions, usually it begins with something really sort of universally applicable and shallow, but then you sort of, layer it on with something more meaningful to you. So my shallow reason why I didn't want to do Wharton was my mother said to me straight up, if you want a business degree, undergraduate business degree is useless in the real world. And if you really want to get a Harvard MBA. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense to me. Sorry. But then the more layered reasoning was, one, I realized that undergraduate school is really about formulating how you think and what you want to do, as opposed to compartmentalizing your thoughts in someone else's box, which is what B school is, right? It tells you how to think in someone else's box. And especially for someone who's very, at the time, heuristic based, I didn't want to be in a box. I wanted to be very fluid and sort of evolve where the wind, as it were, could go. The second piece is I majored in creative writing because it was easy and not just because I loved it. It was only 10 classes, which afforded me obviously the opportunity to be really versatile and take all sorts of marketing courses and open courses and psychology courses and so forth. And then the third piece was, this is easier to say in hindsight because I didn't totally screw up my career, but I thought it was just sexy. I know that sounds really vain, but while all of my counterparts were doing something very pragmatic, I was doing something that on paper was useless. And I don't know. I don't try to be different to be different. I just don't always love what everyone else is doing. If everyone is swimming the same way, I find that there's probably a problem with it.
I'm just thinking about, I'm on TikTok a lot, and the algorithm really is narrow for me, right? Like the more I look at it, the more things I like. And even on my YouTube suggestions, I'm always, I'm up all the time looking for things. But when we talk about a diverse point of view around the world, how can this technology empower that? Like I'm trying to find local things in Africa, and I find it very challenging to find anything beyond the newspapers that are there, that are online. So how can these algorithms do a better job of opening the world for me?
Following up on that, you're looking for a very open, kind of critical thinking, diverse opinions, different point of view. And yet what is happening is where everyone's getting more and more siloed. I mean, how do you think about that as somebody who really works in this field?
Yeah, I think that it's an annoying undulative flow between two polarities. One is the system and two is the individual. So on the system side, there's no question that platforms are failing us in creating a globally resonant baseline of information that should be readily available. Readily available doesn't just mean in terms of geographic reach, but broadband reach, price accessibility, frequency, format, physical disability accessibility, so forth and so on. There is no universal encyclopedia, said another way, in 2021, and there needs to be. Second is Twitter, hilariously, has done the best job at this, but making sure that we can flag facts on top of that baseline is really, really important. Now, whatever debate happens after that is the debate that happens in a free and open internet, but we do need to be able to at least contextualize what is objectively fact as part of that baseline of information. The third piece that unfortunately the platforms constantly have to deal with, and it's just a Sisyphean task because assholes, appear magically all the time and assholes breed more assholes, is constantly just updating themselves, their policies and their services to making sure that we can track and evolve with the narrative time. That being said, if we believe that it's just the system's fault, that mistruths and violence and so forth persist, then we are not the humanists that our forebears thought we were. And so this, on the other side, it's incumbent on individuals to be smart enough and be effortful enough to actually seek the truth as often as possible. Now, we know that can be difficult, but I think that's a matter of not only policing ourselves, but also us policing our children, us policing our neighbors, so forth and so on in really productive ways. And it has to take sort of these both sides to get us there.
That's a tough problem, just critical thinking, teaching, we do, that's not in the curriculum anymore, critical thinking. And then, if you go out around the world, like suddenly you're in places where, when we talk about human rights, we talk about our better life. Sometimes people don't know how, they don't even know that there is a set of human rights. They don't know that, they don't have those basic critical thinking skills. How do we get people ready for that kind of conversation and not destroy their culture by bringing them to this world connecting tool?
Yeah, there's no panacea, as you know, Jesse, but to your point, we are told too much what to think and not how to think. This is where I think structured environments that are outside of the institutional classroom, whether they're public or private in nature, is really important. Said another way, there needs to be a masterclass parallel structure or a Coursera parallel structure to actual traditional academia. That venue should teach you more lifelong skills. This, once again, has to be price accessible, regionally accessible, language accessible, all the things. And then we sort of go from there. The other place that I look at, and this obviously varies by age group, but is making sure that we can have practical application of how one should think from an early age. I'll give you the biggest and most egregious example in the United States. People often forget that the poverty gap actually begins in third grade, and it starts from two different phenomena. One is reading comprehension, and fourth grade is when you're presumed to analyze things. But if you can't read, which is largely when you're taught to do well in third grade, then how are you going to analyze? If you can't analyze, how do you actually process information? If you can't process information, how do you take your SATs, so forth and so on? You see how the problem metastasizes. And so number one is both in and more so out of the classroom, we have to teach third graders how to actually read. To belabor this, I did not learn how to read in school. I learned because my mother read to us every night, period. Many children do not have that luxury. The second phenomenon that we have to fix, that I would argue is probably a third parallel track to that sort of how to think EQ set skills, is social groups and dynamics. Wealthier children during the summers, for instance, are able to afford summer camp, may actually have access to them, whereas those from lower income neighborhoods, A, have parents who are very busy with multiple jobs, B, are not liquid enough to actually afford constant mental and physical stimulation like summer camps. What ends up happening to those kids? They play video games, they eat junk food, so forth and so on. They start to enter a system that they did not ask for. And once again, this is how the poverty, unemployment, uneducated gap begins. And so again, I think this third parallel track, specifically starting at third grade, is one of the many places I would go.
You know, your mom was you had like a super mom, right? Yeah. So
super monster.
Yeah.
So how much? Wait. We can't just throw that out there. What does that mean, being in like?
I'm joking. I love my mother.
Your mom was exceptional,
Yes.
relative to other moms, and or maybe other moms are the same. But what were those qualities that she imparted to you at that early age that brought you up to this critical thinking and made all that possible?
Yeah, I think it's easy. My mother is exceptional as a human being. She taught me at a very early age, and this is easier to say now, that a woman can not only be the economic, but also the emotional center of gravity for an entire family, an entire community, an entire company, and so forth. For a variety of systemic biases that are not women's fault, that are entirely men's faults, Jesse, as you know, that has not been the case for everyone. She did this, of course, on the economic side by being the highest paid woman in the state of Tennessee for a certain period of time as CFO of this insane plastic company, and as the emotional center of gravity for our family when her father, mother, and then husband, known as my father, died back to back 3 years in a row. What does this actually mean? What does this do? I think about it in two ways. One is principally, it shows me what real human resilience is. It shows me that not only is everything surmountable, even death for a family, but also you can surmount this economically. I think second is when you see that the center of gravity of your life is a woman, it makes you completely reimagine not just what women are capable of, but more importantly, what women deserve and what I think all human beings deserve. The good bad news is, I know I'm not alone on this. In this country, a fourth of us grow up in single parent households under the age of 18, almost always by a woman. And so, notions of can a woman be president? Should a woman have a board seat? Many of us have never had sort of the predilections otherwise. In fact, we would expect that to happen and are shocked when it doesn't. And therefore, certainly in my life and many others, feel an even greater responsibility to rebalance those opportunities for other genders.
People, from a philanthropic point of view, they're always talking about commitment to people's better lives. We hear that term all the time. But what does a good death mean?
It's so funny you say that. So good death is actually a technical term, depending on who you are. The punchline is there is no universally known good death, but there are certain baselines that we all sort of aspire towards. So there's sort of, I call it the Trinity, which may be too Western, but there are ultimately three universal wants for human beings. One is to live as long as possible. So this is deceptive because time is obviously not linear. You could live a very full, long life as a 21-year-old or as an 80-year-old, right? But living as long as is fulfilling. Number two is meaningful impact. impact. Many people often conflate this with career because it's where we spend the majority of our time. But as we all know, not everyone loves their job. Third is strong familial relationships. Thanks to the millennials of the world, this is increasingly becoming redefined, but this could mean your spouse, your children, your best friend, your tribe, so forth and so on. A good death presumes that you have hit all three at once and consistently do. Now, how many of us actually get there? You and I both know the answer. And because of the baby boomers who are increasingly passing away, unfortunately, we're about to learn the hard way how lacking, I think, our species is in all three.
Now, in the case of your dad, who was a hard man, what did you commit to after he passed?
I appreciate how you asked that, because a lot of people ask, like, what do you think he wanted? And like, I unfortunately do know because he told my mother, but it's not my place to presume what people wanted in their life, only what I learned from it, right? And so I think one is, unfortunately, watching someone that you love who is part of your biological structure that closely die makes you realize that, one, very few things in life matter. Very, very, very few, which is why I never lose my cool, all that. I think second is it also forces you to reconcile why you are here faster. So we do have a deadline. We all have the same one. It is death. And so have you figured out why you are here? Are you on the path to get there as quickly as possible? And if you're not, what the hell are you doing? And then I think the third thing at a superficial level is just part of the grieving process is productivity, especially if you feel like you can start to reverse something that had happened. And so this is so cheesy now, but when I was 15 and it happened, I called the American Cancer Society customer support line. It was like 10 o'clock, which was very late back then. And long story short, I started the junior board of directors for California. We changed all these smoking policies, all that. And that was my commitment and contribution to him because he had passed away from cancer. Again, in hindsight, this is all like kid play, but you do find that being productive in the same lane is the hardship that you faced is one way out.
Now, what did you see, from the sort of hectic life that he led, the stress that he put himself under constantly? What did that do to you? And what did that make you not want to do in your own life?
It's tough because everyone does the best they can with what they know, and they often do the right things, though it may come off in the wrong way. And I think that was my father. I apparently, when I was 2, told my mother I want a different dad because my memories of him, honestly, are yelling at me. Like, I remember I was in 3rd grade and there's this art show and I was so excited about it. He went out of his way to mat everything with frames, and I had gotten them and I was so excited to show my teacher. I ran to my teacher, and then I tripped and then I frayed the edges. And he drove over to me and I was bloodied up and all that, but I was from Tennessee, so I don't care. And I kept going, and he comes over to me and he looks at me and says, "What the fuck did you do?" And I thought, obviously now as an adult, I know what he really was asking. He said, "I'm so heartbroken that you hurt something you care so much about, including yourself." But it comes off as if it is my fault. And those are my memories of my father. And I think the things that it taught me were, one, again, most things do not matter. And not only that, but they need to be treated as such from a tonal perspective, from compartmentalization perspective, so forth and so on. I think second is, honestly, it showed me what kind of father I don't want to be. I want to be hit economically, but that's about it. Right. And it's not his fault. He had a lot of baggage and a lot of things. He had to bring his whole family over from Taiwan and so forth, things that I will never have to experience because he gave us this life. But I do think, at least emotively, it showed me what kind of father and what kind of parent I want to be. But yeah, it's tough. I wish I could say more positive things, but it's tough. I think, especially if you're Asian or a minority, unfortunately, a lot of us have this experience with our fathers where you love them, but you first hate them.
Can we jump in and talk a little bit about that? The idea of the model minority and, your dad, everything having this sort of, you hear this, I don't know where this comes from. What do you think about that? And is it true? Where does this come from? This sort of, and again, let's use it under the framing, I guess, of model minority, but where does this all come from?
So the model minority myth was a construct created by a Caucasian person in the 60s and effectively used to weaponize the AAPI community against the Black community who were fighting for collective civil rights. At one polarity, the Black Panthers were effectively using different tactics to, again, fight for their own rights, and the government and certain incumbents thought that was scary. And so instead, they pointed to this other group, APIs, and said, look at these non-white folks. They're quiet, diligent, gainfully employed, high income. Why don't all of you others, as it were, become them? What ended up happening is a couple of issues over the last few decades. One is it gives the misperception that APIs are all gainfully employed, educated, and so forth, when in reality, we actually have the widest income disparity of any race. When you look at certain regions like New York City, where I am, we have actually the highest index of those in poverty under the age of 18 of any group. It's 50%, by the way, it's 50. And you also just erase certain ethnicities. So lower income folks, with the exception of the Filipino diaspora among APIs, Southeast Asians actually have the highest rates of poverty in this country. And so within the own community, you start to fracture us. The second issue is when two minorities fight each other, we all know what happens. Only one wins, and that is, of course, the old majority. And so actually that created a set of sort of intra-community bias where anti-Blackness within the API is still sort of rampant, unfortunately, among older generations in certain regions. So that's what effectively the model minority myth has done. I think it's interesting because like at a behavioral level, model minority myths perpetuates that all of our Asian parents are what are known as tiger parents. And this, of course, is a euphemism for study hard, don't come home. Like there's this whole funny joke, like if you get an A-, that's an Asian F, like you don't get dinner, all these things. To be very honest, I never faced that. And I have no recollection of facing that from either of my parents. I don't know why, to be honest. I think it's partly genetic.
Never got an A-, that's why.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. Though I did get a C+ one time. But no, I think my parents were always really empowering. And I remember, like, I'll give you an example. I just like playing the piano, which I know seems like a stereotypical Asian thing to do, but I just saw 88 keys and thought, wow, I could do a lot with this. And my parents asked me, what do you want to play? I said piano. They sent me to Suzuki method, classical. I hated it. I did it for maybe 3 weeks. And then my mother said, well, what do you want to play instead? And I said, Beauty and the Beast. And so she let me play Beauty and the Beast. And I know every version of Beauty and the Beast. I became a jazz, concert pianist. I loved it. And so, again, I don't know if this was them being Socratic by saying, you can do these 10 things and then whatever you want inside. I don't know if it was that, or I just felt always just really organically empowered. But I personally, truly never felt like I was within confines. Everything I did was striving for myself. It was never to please my parents. I mean, I have to assume it's just good parenting, but I personally have not really felt the model minority myth pressure.
So, you're at YouTube, you're in a meeting, there's a bunch of senior people in the meeting. You've been just as responsible for the strategies that are employed there as they have, but yet you're the most junior position. I don't know your title. And so you decide it's time to leave. What was the first moment when you actually got to your apartment or house and that door closed? Did you know where you were going and what you were going to do? And was it a fearful moment? How did you feel?
I had conviction in it because I've always known what I wanted to be, and that is an existential Walt Disney. And I think as long as you know what you want to become, everything else in the middle is just a detail and about time and spacing. I think the second issue is I was just honestly so fed up with the bureaucracy. Like I am a very good person who is very effective, and what you see is what you get. And the second I have to deal with bullshitters who are not effective is the second I start to just like sully. And there was just a lot of sullying. We had a running joke in the last 6 months when I was leaving, not even about me, but about many of us who are in what we call Gen 1 YouTube, who got there in like 2010. When we first got there, we could get whatever we wanted done within a month, but now it took 6 months just to get approval to wipe our own ass. And we obviously said this as a joke, but it was also very true.
I have a question about your own version of Walt Disney. What is the golden rule? What golden rule with your background? What is actually the mission of it? What are the principles and the values?
Yeah, it's very easy. And it goes back to the Trinity we had earlier. It's living the life that you dreamed of as quickly, deeply, and as longly as possible. The end. It says very succinctly, delivering the meaning of life to people much faster, longer, and more deeply.
How does content do that?
So we think about it in two halves. So there's stories and systems. So on the story side, I'll never invest in like a bear becoming a toad talking to blank, not to be reductive to all the fantastic fictitious thinkers of the world. We only focus on socioculturally relevant narratives that push society forward in a pragmatic way. So I'll give you one example that I'm really excited about from our film fund. Our latest film, Passing, its release date just got announced for November 10th on Netflix. It's about two Black women, one of which passes as white in society. And of course, this is not only an intra-Black community, but an extra-Black community narrative about different layers of racism. Secondarily, we also focus on first-time filmmakers who are multicultural, who have been traditionally marginalized, who we think can go all the way. Our chief creative, Nini Bon Jovi, who's just a titan in the industry, is the person who launched the careers of Ryan Coogler, of Chloe Zhao, of Boots Riley, aka traditionally marginalized voices who have all of which gone all the way. Ryan Coogler, most lucrative Black director last decade. Chloe Zhao, single most awarded director in a single season for Nomadland, so forth and so on. So that's one example of how, again, we're not going to do buddy cops. We're not going to do whatever. It's got to be about a people and pushing us forward. My creative franchise as well is about death, but in a very pragmatic way. And it is because not only all of us are going to die, but a third of us, specifically our parents of the baby boomers, are dying already right now. And we're not prepared.
When we spoke a couple of months ago, there was a concern that this moment, really focusing on stopping Asian hate and AAPI coming into the foreground as an important community. First of all, how are we doing? When the world keeps ravaging, and there's so many things going on. The Delta variant, there's Afghanistan, there's a problem every, how is this sort of movement, if you will, progressing or not progressing? And also, are we seeing more influences and more of a multicultural experience on television or in films? Like, are we getting better? Where are we? How are you rating us?
You gave the answer to the question. As Priscilla is astutely pointing out, attacks are higher than ever, unfortunately, and there's certainly less media coverage. So that's where we are. It's not for any bad reasons. It's not to diminish the experience we've had. It's, of course, just because, unfortunately, the world is wrought with war in all sorts of forms, and different things rise to the stage at different times. In terms of where the moment is, I think about it in two ways. And I think this is a lesson from my mother. I've never felt like a victim. So us leading the movement or co-leading the movement is not about who is going to let us. It's who's going to stop us. And so we have the most material things, at least on Goal House's end, that we've ever launched coming in the next month, not just to sort of combat hate and attacks, but to affirm who we are, why we deserve to be here, and how we are collectively growing society. We're doing this in our two weapons of creative and commerce, our creative and companies. I think the second piece that you're rightfully alluding to, Priscilla, is unfortunately the experience that befalls us is not unique to our community. Attacks against every multicultural community, including the Jewish community in this country, who actually have the highest rate of attacks per capita, by the way, even throughout the Stop Asian Hate movement, are unfortunately quite universal. And so I think, once again, this is about not only who's going to stop me, but more importantly, who's going to stop me from actively engaging other communities in sincere, sustainable ways. So in a couple months, you'll see how Gold House is really working with many other orgs to fortify relationships among all marginalized communities so we can co-invest in each other's creative and companies and co-promote them reliably. This is not about minorities versus old majority. This is about us rebalancing things in our own hands, in our own make, on our own time, in ways that the system is not moving towards quickly enough.
The American dream, we always have the opportunity to redefine this dream. Yeah. Does AAPI have the opportunity, the pursuit of happiness? Is that possible in America, even though it's hard and rough? Me and Priscilla work on these problems from lots of different directions, but do you feel like it's still possible?
I think, unfortunately, all things are possible. It's just a matter of, are you growing up in a more oblivion-ridden environment or not? So I do think all things are possible still. And I think our species has demonstrated that despite pandemics, despite economic recessions, that we are incredibly resilient. That being said, on the other side is like, I don't even know what happiness is. And I remember my mother told me when I was 10, she was really worried that I was never going to be happy or content, because I think a lot of people think they're the same thing. And I don't know, in my own life, I just reconciled that I love everything and I'm always joyful, but am I happy and content? I don't think that's for me. And I don't think that's my job. I'm not here to be selfishly happy all the time. I'm here to serve and help enable others. And I know this, I don't want to sound like all high mighty and all that nonsense, but I don't know why I'm this way. It's just who I was raised to be. I don't even know that it's for everyone, but I think that's also okay.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
We have other stuff to talk to you about at another time. So I'd love to check in with you. Thank you so much, Bing.
No, very
Be safe out there.